University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He has served as an assistant professor at University of Arkansas and as an instructor at North Carolina State University. He also has worked in IBM, Sony Ericsson, BPM Technologies.
Dr. Conrad is a professional engineer, a senior member of IEEE and a certified project management profession. He is also a member of Eta Kappa Nu, the Project Management Institute and the American Society of Engineering Education. He has been elected to serve on the IEEE Board of Directors as Region 3 Director for 2016 and 17. He is the author of numerous books, journals, articles and conference paper in the area of embedded system, robotics, parallel processing and engineering education. Now we call upon Dr. Jim Conrad to deliver his address.
Good morning. So I'm going to supercharge my talk today with I don't know if this has the same reputation here as it does in the U.S., but in the U.S. this has one of the highest levels of caffeine of any soft drink. So if I get too slow this morning, I'll just open the can and get more energy. But you can help by being involved. So, good morning.
Good morning.
All right, nice and active. I was not allowed to come up here and log in and start everything up. Now you get to see how all my files are organized. So, we're going to talk about ethics in research and the profession. And what I mean by ethics in research and the profession, it's both ethics as a postgraduate scholar, or for that matter, even an undergraduate student, as well as once you enter the profession and you're working as a professor or maybe in industry. And I've got some really good examples here of people who did not practice ethics in the profession, and you'll see what it is in just a few minutes. So, remember how I said that you need to be active and participatory? So, I'm going to ask you, what exactly is ethics in research? So, what I want you to do is to turn to your neighbor, and maybe two neighbors, and discuss what you think research or ethics in research is and the profession. And then after I give you a few minutes to talk about it amongst yourselves, then I'm going to take some of your pages and I'm going to talk about it with everybody. So go ahead, spend a few minutes, talk to each other. What does it mean? Kind of unusual to do it this way, huh? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect some of the things that you write. So I guess that means I need to collect that, and that means I can keep it, right? Go ahead, talk to each other. somebody wrote? I like this one. Copying content from others without citation. So that would be ethical? What do you mean it would be non-ethical if you copy without citation? So make sure you're specific. My phone's not far away. Oh, we're good. Come on, go. Another one over here. Transparency. That's a good ethic to have, right? Transparency. So that's a good thing. So yeah, go do that. More. Give me more ideas. I'm trying to figure out what that means. Oh, work in a team.
Sometimes you can say same domain of people, different people, they work with the same domain. We should not overshadow
Give the credit where credit is due. Okay, that's good. Turn it off so I'm not talking. Okay. Off, not off. So I got, there's some good ones down here. Maintaining data. In other words, it's a good ethic and practice for that matter to make sure that you maintain data. And actually, there's one more word in there, and that's truthful data, not fake data. There's lots of researchers out there who have manufactured fake data. And then there's another one, confidential means confidential. So if you're working with a company and they ask you to keep something confidential, you do that. Or even better, they probably want to record this, or even better, I just talked with your director today about this thought and concept. If you review a paper for a journal or a conference, you are to do that in confidence, and it's to remain confidential. And taking those ideas that you just reviewed of a rejected paper especially, and then repeating them or submitting them as your own ideas, that's not keeping it confidential either, so that's some good ideas as well. Keep working. I give you a couple more minutes. Well, I'm going to get somebody all the way over on the side so they don't think they can hide. Reviewing somebody's work and identifying that it is good or bad. Because sometimes all right, any more? Anybody wants to share? All right, let's see if we can go up here and share one. And then I've got a whole bunch of them that are listed there. Social responsibility. In other words, one has to keep in mind that what is the role of an engineer, and the role of an engineer is to protect society. And so actually we'll talk about that quite a bit in a few minutes. All right, so we've got several people who came up with some great ideas. And so I've done this talk in several places. So let me show you some of the things that other groups and other students have come up with. Wow, this sounds a lot different when I'm not underneath a speaker. So, no plagiarism. Don't copy somebody else's work. Do research in a timely manner. Cite others' work. We've heard some of these. Acknowledge. List everyone's contribution. Another group came up with that. Don't falsify data. We talked about that. Some are not only ethics, but it's good practices like work methodically, be cognizant of proprietary information. We talked about that. So, let me show you an example. Here's a paper. So is this a good paper? It appeared in this journal. Has anybody published anything in that journal? Okay, just wondering. Or you're just brand new scholars, so you may not have published anything yet, right? Okay, so here's a journal. Implementation of CAN bus in autonomous all-terrain vehicle. And by T. Swathi and S. Koshwara Rao. Are these two people here? Just wondering. Look at this. One is a postgraduate scholar, and one is an associate professor and a head of department. Pretty good. And so they talk about this thing, and there's something over there called Zabatabat, which is an all-terrain vehicle. By the way, does anybody know what an all-terrain vehicle is? Have you ever seen an all-terrain vehicle in India? No? So it's really unusual to have an all-terrain vehicle here in India, right? So, let's take a look at this. It must be a really good paper because it looks like somebody copied it. Look at this. Implementation of CAN bus in an autonomous all-terrain vehicle. It talks about everything including Zapata bots. Well, that's pretty darned amazing. Two exact papers. So I think somebody copied the other paper because they look the same. And here's this one down here. One thing I should say is this doesn't look like the picture's very good. That picture over there looks pretty good. Oh, look at that. That's an IEEE paper too. And this is copyright 2011. And this says copyright 2015. Something funny is going on. So, wow. Looks like the IEEE paper came first. So, what is wrong? So I could open this up for discussion, but I think you're pretty advanced, you know what it is, right? Looks like somebody took an existing paper and put their name on it. Well, first of all, it's an Indian paper from an Indian institution. And it talks about an all-terrain vehicle. Now, do you think the reviewers would have looked at that paper and said, what's an all-terrain vehicle and how did one exist in India since they're not very prevalent? And in fact, for that matter, it talks about an $8,000 all-terrain vehicle. Why isn't this paper describing an all-terrain vehicle in terms of rupees? Why are they using dollars if this is an Indian institution in an Indian journal? So there are several flags that reviewers should have come up with when they're looking at this paper. And in fact, it turns out that the papers are exact. So how often does it happen that you submit something for publication and they come back with absolutely no comments and said, this is perfect, use it as is? I don't know about you, but I have never, ever, ever reviewed a paper and said, don't make any changes. There's always typos in it. And so, one thing I could talk about is, so what happened? A researcher submitted a paper to the journal. It's apparent they didn't do the work. Apparent they didn't write any of the words. Apparent that they are representing this work as their own. They lied to the publisher. And then also, the publisher violated copyright laws by copyrighting an already copyrighted work. And even worse, look at the last one. The student probably got their master's degree, or project work or whatever, for some work they didn't do and words they didn't write. So that says something about the institution itself. So I guess, one could say, wow, shouldn't a postgraduate student know better? And more importantly, shouldn't a head of department know better? And the answer is apparently not. And so, all right, put yourself in the shoes. We say this in the U.S. You say this as well. Put yourself in the shoes. I guess here it would be Sammons, right? Of the original authors of this paper. So, how would you feel if somebody took credit for what you did? Violated. That's pretty interesting. So who else has been wronged? Not just the authors, but IEEE, because now their paper and their brand is lessened by the fact that it was illegally duplicated. The publisher, because obviously the publisher was duped into believing that this was original work. And then of course the student who didn't do the work hasn't learned anything. And in fact, they didn't learn anything by doing the work. So there are a lot of wrongdoings. And oh, by the way, whose paper was it? Well, since I own one of these ATVs, and since I actually am on the paper, this was one of my papers that an Indian institution grabbed and duplicated. Now, it's interesting how I found out about this. How many of you are aware of Google Scholar? All right, pretty much all of you. And so in Google Scholar, every so often it will tell you if somebody has referenced one of your papers. All right? Well, it just so happens that in my original paper, I referenced another one of my papers. So I referenced a paper that I wrote in 2010. And so I got a notification from Google Scholar saying that somebody referenced my 2010 paper. And then I look at the title and it's kind of like, man, this sounds familiar. And I start reading the abstract and it's like, this seems really, really, really familiar. So I would not have even known this paper exists if they had not referenced one of my earlier papers that I also referenced in this paper. And so, in the end, I contacted the journal. They were like, who are you? So then I had IEEE go after them. And apparently IEEE has a little bit more national or international respect than I do alone. So really, who has been hurt by this incident? Well, IEEE. Well, the authors, first of all. IEEE, because of their brand, it's been compromised because there's two identical papers out there. The unethical authors who got away with this are encouraged to do it again. Oh, by the way, are you going to be their next victim? The Indian publisher, the authors put them in a legal position. The authors of the legitimate papers with this Indian publisher, they see the values of their own papers decrease because listed in that issue, they're going to say this paper has been withdrawn. Actually, it turns out this is even more interesting. I looked at that just a couple of weeks ago. I looked at that particular issue. There were 2 papers in that issue of that journal that were pulled because of plagiarism. Now, we don't know to what level. Mine was 100%. Who knows what the others are? And so, this is the whole premise of the rest of my talk. Is this really an extreme example? I don't know. Let's ask. Do you think is this an extreme example, or do you think this might be happening more often than you think? What do you think? Let's take a vote. Oh, by the way, I often have votes during my... Yeah, it's maybe battery or something like that. I often have votes during my talks, so you have to vote. And if you don't vote, I'm going to come down and I'm going to ask you personally. So you got to vote. You have to vote one way or the other. You can't just not vote. All right, so Is this happening a lot? Yes or no? Who says yes? Raise your hand. Who says no? All right? I would ask that person who says no, but you know what? That's all right. I don't want to come all the way up there. Who didn't vote at all? Man, yeah, I'm the only honest person there. All right. I just ran a conference at KL University up in Vijayawada, and it's an IEEE-based conference. We got 177 papers submitted. We ran it through a tool called Crosscheck that told us how much of the content was out there in the real world already. And it is amazing how many papers out there have large chunks of the writing, and it was even more that already exist out there. And it was even more amazing to find that 3 complete papers had already been published, were already out there, that had just been taken and the name replaced at the top. 3 instances. And it wasn't the original author was resubmitting it. This was completely different people. So it's amazing that people would do this today because we have the tools to be able to identify that they're doing it. So one thing I should mention is there's a tool called Crosscheck that IEEE conferences and journals use now. They're required. That will go out and look at every single paper available in all of the databases that might have access, that you might have access to. And in fact, IEEE has agreements with Springer Verlag and a lot of the other, Elsevier and all the other main publishers that will be able to look at their proprietary databases for this particular situation. And also, there's all the papers that are available out there in the world that you could just do a Google search on. And so we find it. And it's amazing how many people have a substantial amount of papers that are just what we call cut and paste from others. And that's the problem with plagiarism, and that's the problem with research ethics that we see today. Now, if somebody is willing to do that, are they practicing these ethics? And what are the implications? And so, if you're publishing your own work and representing it as their own, what does that look like? So here are other examples, all right? Oh, by the way, theft is taking something that belongs to another. Usually the inter party no longer has that item. So is plagiarism also theft? Something to think about. By the way, if a student and professor work together and the student publishes a paper about the work without including the professor, is that ethical? And what it comes down to is contribution, and what we say is identifying the true participants in everything you do. So if I were to work in an area, and in one particular area a student helped me extensively, the expectation would be that anything that we publish on that work would have both of our names. In the same way, if a student is working under the guidance of a professor, and the professor is guiding them and giving them ideas and reviewing the paper, the expectation is that the professor would be on that paper as well. First of all, it gives some credibility to a paper if both a postgraduate or an undergraduate student and a professor have their name on it, because it says that this was done as a collaborative effort. So let's look at some other examples. I think I pretty much talked all about this. Oh, you know what? I split that slide into 2 slides. Oops, all right, and I didn't remove the first one. So, ethics and a engineer's obligation to society. And this is pretty much a universal idea and thought, is that a practitioner's or an engineer's I am trying to get this clipped and it's not working. An engineer's responsibility is first to society. It is not to their specific company, it is not to their specific institution. It is to society. Because sometimes there may be a conflict between an engineer working on a project which will benefit the company, but it will be very detrimental or in fact even dangerous to society. And so in situations like that, an engineer is obligated to society. They must be a guardian of safety and welfare for the public, and as such, truthful and complete reports, don't abuse the public trust, and inform state boards or national boards of any possible ethic violations. So this is, even though it's in practice, for example, if you're building a bridge, you want to ensure that you do not design substandard materials, because that would violate the obligation to society. Or if you're developing electronics for airplanes, and you develop something that will perform most of the time, but not all the time, and if it doesn't perform well all the time, well, that's okay, because it's just a few times. By the way, airplanes don't usually fly well when the power goes off in the entire plane. So, IEEE itself has a code of ethics, and we, the members of IEEE, in recognition of the importance of our technologies, it goes on and on, highest ethical and professional conduct, and you agree to, and there are some things that we say. For example, we accept responsibility in making engineering decisions consistent with safe, healthy health and welfare of the public. So the important, again, right up front, number one, the IEEE Code of Ethics says that you are looking at the health and welfare of the public. Also, we talk about in IEEE to avoid real and perceived conflicts of interest, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Ibm has a code of ethics, and in fact, this includes that no employee may accept gratuities or gifts from a supplier, and no employee can give money or gift of significant value to a supplier. This is interesting because in some cases, one would say, I mean, you know, they're just giving me a gift as a welcome and a formality. And that happens in some cultures. For example, in the United States, it is common that a company will give a t-shirt or a pen or something like that to advertise their business. Is that acceptable as a gift? It might be. But do you think it would be a little bit unusual if they gave someone maybe 10,000 rupees? Does that go a little bit beyond advertising their company gift? So you have to think about the goal of the gift giving, and we're going to look at examples of that. TI itself has a code of ethics as well. Everybody's familiar with Texas Instruments? Yes? Yes? Yes. No, hold on. Yes. I can't remember what that is. The head bob, okay. May not give or accept any gift. If we receive any substantial gift or favor, it must be returned and our supervisor notified. Wow. And they're kind of specific. Does not apply to items of small value commonly exchanged in business relationships. So a polo shirt or something else like that. Excessive entertainment of any sort is not acceptable. Conferences with a meal with suppliers is often necessary and desirable. Should be on a reciprocal basis. Interesting. And they even have a quick ethics test. And this is rather interesting. So, you know, they ask, is it legal? Does it comply with your values? How will it look if it appears in the local newspaper? I've seen the Indian newspapers. They love to print stuff like this, don't they? If you know it's wrong, don't do it. If you're not sure, ask. Keep asking until you get a question. So sometimes your interpretation is one thing, but usually what really matters is your manager's interpretation of it. So let's look at this hypothetical example. Is this bribery? You are a design engineer and responsible for selecting a supplier of an expensive high-volume component. You are visited by a sales engineer who gives you a ballpoint pen and a baseball cap. So based on those other examples earlier, is that okay? Is that ethical? Is that yes? Is that no? Is that I'm not sure, all right? Well, let's look at some of the other examples. We're going to all take votes on this. Offers to take you out to lunch at a nice and expensive restaurant. Offers to take you to an international cricket game that weekend. Includes an all expenses paid developers training class in Hawaii if you purchase from him or her. By the way, you know what Hawaii is, right? Hawaii is a very nice place. Has anybody been to Hawaii? Okay, Hawaii is a very nice tropical paradise place. It's actually rather expensive there. And then offers to send you on a all expenses paid vacation for two to Barbados, which is a Caribbean island, if you purchase from him or her. So I guess the question is, how should you respond to each of these offers? So I want you to think about this and turn to your neighbor and discuss yes or no if they're acceptable behavior, if they're ethical behavior. So I'll give you 3 minutes to talk to your neighbor. Go ahead, figure it out. Lots of talk to each other. Oh, people are slowing down, so I guess I need our ride. All right, so let's take a quick poll here, and you have to answer. And then as we go on, we'll make some other votes. So number one, who thinks that it's okay, it's ethical to do that? Raise your hand. All right, if you don't raise your hand, I'm going to walk up to you and ask you why you don't think it is. All right, good. There's a gentleman right here. So you don't think it's ethical? No, why not?
Because if they are, if I using that, it may have an impression that I am taking more from them.
Just number one, the ballpoint pen and baseball cap.
Yes, using that from there.
Okay. Now, would you just make that decision yourself, or would you talk to your manager?
I'm not. I will make the decision.
Oh, you make the decision yourself. Okay. So, based on, well, that's a valid thing to say. So he would say thank you very much, and hopefully, the organization offering, by the way, at the same time, he would say thank you very much, but it might appear as if I am taking something from you as a more than just a gift for your company. Yeah, it's good to explain it. According to the TI policy, that would be okay. Okay? But you don't work for TI, so that's okay. All right. Number 2, how many of you think number 2, it's okay, it's ethical to be able to accept that? Okay? A couple of you? All right? You didn't say yes. Why not? It's not okay? Okay. Well, what if the person doesn't have much time and you need to eat? And they want to talk to you while they do that? Okay, without going to a restaurant, you can talk. All right? Okay. So, let's see. Who raised their hand on this one? Number 2. Who's lower down here because I don't want to walk all the way up there. Who says number 2 is okay? Raise your hand.
Maybe in friendly.
Maybe in?
Friendly.
Okay, maybe friendly. And by the way, nothing says that the first time they pay and the second time you pay. Right? And in fact, the TI policy said that if you go out to a restaurant, that the expectation is that it will be reciprocated. And by the way, in the U.S., this is a common way of doing business. All right? This is considered acceptable, as long as you don't abuse it. And an abuse of this would be, we're going out to the finest restaurant in town, and we're ordering a 6,600 rupee bottle of wine, and the whole bill turns out to be, let's see if I can get the word, at least 1.5 lakh. Is that, no, that's not right. Is that would be $1 million. 100,000 rupees or something, or just an obnoxious amount of money. All right. So yeah, you got the idea. You're thinking about all this. All right. Offers to take you to a cricket game that weekend. You think that's appropriate, or would that be more like they're trying to buy your favor? So who says that would be okay? Okay. Oh, because you like cricket, right?
No cricket.
Any sport, okay. You think it would be okay? Why is that?
Personally, I'm good to him. I like anything, so I like to go for it.
But wouldn't that be interpreted as maybe they're trying to buy your favor?
I don't think it will be such a costly affair to interpret as favor.
Okay.
Compared to restaurant.
Compared to restaurant, correct. Yeah, okay. And by the way, 2 and 3 are often up to interpretation as well. So when all else fails, talk to your manager, all right? Number 4, all expenses paid, developers conference, training class in Hawaii if you purchase from him or her. Yes or no? Who says yes, it's okay? Who says no, it's not okay?
Expensive.
All right, it's expensive, right? And then number 5 has absolutely nothing to do with the companies and nothing to do with the work. And it sounds like somebody's trying to buy your favor. So I would agree with you. That's probably not very ethical at all. Now, remember I said that there were some gray areas here. In other words, some instances where maybe it's ethical, maybe it's not. And so you have to think about each one of the situations. So there's no cut and dry, as we say. There's no definite yes or no in all of the cases. So when all else fails, ask. Ask your manager. So here is another example. So here's an actual example. A project manager was responsible for specifying and selecting capital equipment, $1 million. Wow. One vendor offered a trip anywhere in the world for an acceptance test. Another vendor offered satisfaction of any vice, gambling, women, drink, etc. Travel included with the system, various foods of gift, food and drink. So, you know, if you think about it, $1 million is a lot of money. Is a lot of money. And sometimes an organization selling will do whatever they can to be able to make the sale. And so, for every gift, you have to consider the ethical implications. Now let's look at another example. A software engineer is estimating the time required to complete a project. And the sales engineer is estimating the specifications of a new product. And design engineer is estimating cost to develop a new product. So they're all thinking about making estimates. Now, the problem is that it is unethical to deliberately provide a biased estimate. Here's the reason why. Is very often, a company will ask you to estimate how much effort, not only how much, calendar time, but how much time of engineers it will take to do something. If you underestimate on purpose, your company may not get enough money to pay everybody to do that work, which means that your company doesn't make the profit, which means that your company is very sad. And in the end, you will be very sad because you probably won't work for the company anymore because you purposely underestimated. Now, making a mistake when you estimate is one thing. Changing requirements, which means that your estimate is not valid, is different. But purposely saying, I'm going to underestimate it because I really want to get that job and I want to be the lowest bidder, is not ethical. So, if you were to now look at an example of conflict of interest. So we have an example. A software engineer was contracted, or actually contracted with one of their customers for a little bit of side work. So in other words, let's say I worked for Ericsson. That's a good example. And in the evening, I did some work for another telecommunications company, or maybe another company running software, but that they provided stuff for Ericsson. And oh, by the way, because I was doing it on my own, I'd get some money and I'd charge them less for the same amount of work. But it was only a small amount of work. Well, in one example, the ramifications were felt for 5 to 10 years because the work that was done actually was not supported, and the company itself had to rework or redo some of that work. Now, in the US, many employers have these restrictions on what you can do outside of your work time. So if I work for a company like IBM, I cannot work in the evening on software development. Or if I work for a power company, I can't work for another organization on a power-related industry. So the reason being is, well, if you're doing the same work for IBM that you could do for the other company, why isn't IBM doing that in the first place? So I guess we should step back and say, well, why should you behave ethically? And there are some implications for, or there are some reasons for that. One, it works. In a capitalistic economy, which works on competition, if everybody fairly competes, then the free market will take care of the appropriate support for the work that has to be done. Your profession depends on it as well. Your behavior reflects upon your employer. So if you do not behave ethically, and let's say your company is again IBM, then IBM is harmed because of your unethical behavior. Morally, it's the right thing to do, and it's what is expected of your profession. So how do you maintain a high level of ethics? Well, here's a good a way to look at this. Right now, practice making ethical decisions. So frequent small decisions in the wrong direction means that you will lead to poor habits in the future. So if you start practicing ethical behaviors now, it will continue on. So if you've looked at this, you've noticed that when I referenced something that came from somebody else, I cited it. That's a good small practice to put in there. So if you are making a presentation, it would probably be very good that if you are not the source of that photo, put a very small citation at the bottom of where you got it from. That lets people know that you didn't create it, you just borrowed it from the internet. And then here, when in school, follow the student code of conduct, ask the professor if needed, and associate with ethical people. So obviously on that one paper earlier, that professor and head of department was not an ethical person, and so that postgraduate scholar, I can only surmise that that postgraduate scholar got the advice from the professor to go out and take an exact copy of a paper. Because think about this. Why would a professor and head of department whose name is on a paper, if they were an ethical person, approve that paper being published when they knew they didn't do the work? They didn't have an all-terrain vehicle. So they knew it was wrong. And then also, if you are having difficulty with a company and their ethics, you might want to look for a new job, because it happens that companies that practice unethical behavior actually get found out eventually, and you may be tarnished along with the company. So it might be good just to leave the company before your reputation is tarnished as well. All right, so now let's take a look at some ethical situations and see what you think should happen. So, ethical situation number one. You're going to have to vote on one of these. So I want you to think about it. I'm going to make you talk with each other about it too. So you work for your company, you invent a device that has the potential for making you very wealthy. You use the company's lab and test facilities, but you did the work on your own time, like in the evening and weekends. So what do? Well, you take it to the company's legal department for determination of ownership rights, or you just go and see a local attorney, or you submit your invention for consideration in your company's Ideas Count program, or you contact the companies who would have an interest in your invention and sell it to the highest bidder, so that you wouldn't have to be associated or involved with the name on that. So spend 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes talking to the people next to you and figure out which one is probably the best thing to do. All right? I'm going to vote. You only have to choose. You have to choose one of the 4 options. Go to it. Talk. You're not talking.
since you are using the lab.
Let's take a vote. All right. Now, each person has to vote. If you don't vote, I'm going to identify you, and I'm going to say you must have voted for option number N, which will be the worst one. And I'll ask you why you voted for option number N. Right? So, who thinks number 4 is the more appropriate one to do? Raise your hand. All right? And you are just a rabble rouser. I'm not even going to go over there and ask about it. Who of you think number 3 is the appropriate one? Okay. All right. Who thinks number 2 is the appropriate one? Oh, this I'm going to ask. So why is number 2 appropriate? Sweet. Okay. So if you can sell it to anywhere else if you do the patent. All right. That's interesting. All right. Who thinks? So I'm going to talk about why one of these is good and some of these are really bad. All right. So we got that idea. All right. Who thinks number 1 is appropriate? Okay. So. In the U.S., and I gotta believe it's the same everywhere else, if you work on a company's or using a company's resources, that is then owned no matter what time you do this up. That is. You know what? The battery's probably going down. Oh, what a bad time for this to go down. Okay. If you do anything on using the company's resources, for that matter, the university's resources, whatever you come up with is owned by the company or the university. All right? And in fact, when you, in the U.S.,
Is it any joining letter?
and it's in the U.S., when you join on the first day, they actually say anything you come up with, even if it's on your own time in your own home, is owned by them as long as you're employed by the company. You laugh. So, postgraduate students, anything you do here in this university, if it's like any university, I think it is, it's owned by the university. Even though it was your idea, it's still owned by the university. At the same time. So in that case, number 1 is probably the appropriate one. Now, number 3 is okay, submit your invention for consideration in your company's idea accounts program. But usually when you do a patent disclosure or an invention disclosure, you usually start with the university's technology transfer group, which may be lawyers. So, 1 or 3 is fine. Ones that are not good are number 2 and 3, or 2 and 4. Because as I said, anything you do with company resources are owned by the company. Now, let me give you an example of how I got an exception. So when I started working for Ericsson, I let them know right up front on the first day that I have invented a robot called Stakito. And Stakito is a small little insect-like robot that has electronics and software, etc. So I'm going to continue working on Stakito, and as a condition of my employment, I want you to recognize that Stakito is mine, but I'm going to do it all on my own time and my own resources. And since Ericsson worked in telecommunications and not insect-like robots, they said yes, that's okay. All right, but I disclosed that all the way at the beginning. So, let's look at ethical situation number 2. Ethical situation number 2. These are so much fun, aren't they? Hopefully this gets you to think about the outside world, all right? This is a difficult one as well. So, a company-sponsored training course in your field is being held in Orlando, Florida. Oh, what the heck, we could make it someplace exciting. Where do you want to go travel to? Here in Singapore. Let's go to Singapore, how about that? All right? Or would you rather go to Disney World?
Amsterdam.
You want to go to Disney World?
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam. I don't think they do any training in Amsterdam. They just do one thing there, right? I've been there, I know. All right, let's leave it as Orlando, Florida, Disney World. The happiest place on earth, by the way, if you're not familiar with Disney World. So, it is a company-sponsored training course, and you really don't have an interest in the training, but you're ready for a vacation and you've never been to Disney World. So what do you do? Well, let's see. Option 1, even though you have no interest, you ask your supervisor if he thinks it will benefit you. Obviously or not so obviously, it will be of some benefit, so you sign up anyhow. 3, reluctantly decline to go. Or 4, suggest somebody else who has both a need and the interest. So, what I want you to do right now is go ahead and determine, talk with your neighbors, determine which one is going to be the best option. You get to choose one of these 4. So talk amongst each other. And for my buddy up there who always chooses the one that are most unethical, I'll give you number 5. Yeah. Is the battery? This is more of a tough one, so if you have difficulty with this, that's okay. Give me another minute to talk about this and determine. Which one? Let me take it. All right, so let's vote. You ready? You have to vote for one of them. Who votes for number 1? Who votes for number 2? Who votes for number 3? Who votes for number 4? Who didn't vote for any of them? Which one did you vote for? Number 3. Okay. So number 3 must be the most unethical one. Is that what you're saying? All right. Now, actually, if you think about this is tough, isn't it? Right? So what did we say earlier when you were in ethical decisions? What's the best thing to do? Talk to your supervisor. Right? Because even though you have no interest in the training, ask your supervisor if he thinks it will benefit you. Because it might not just benefit you, it may benefit the department because he needs somebody to go, and you're the perfect person who has that expertise to be able to identify this thing is going. I think it's because I'm, pardon me? No, I mean this. No. It may be that, you know what, I'm just going to use this. That thing's cutting in and out. It may be that the information is really needed for the department, you have the most skills to do it, and he wants you to go there so that you can then teach everybody else. Right? You never know. That may be the reason. And then number 2, go ahead.
What if the supervisor go? Supervisor wants to go, but there is no connection with the department.
So what if the supervisor wants to go, and he's the most inappropriate person to go? What does that tell you? Your supervisor is unethical. That's when you find a new job, right? All right, number 2, obviously or not so obviously, it will be of some benefit to you, so you sign up anyhow. And again, it comes back to number 1. This may be true as well. But again, talk to your supervisor is probably the best thing to do. Reluctantly decline to go, and if you want to do that, that's okay. That's very ethical. Is it the best thing for your career or for the department? And then number 4, suggest somebody else who has a need and the interest. And we're going to suggest it to your supervisor. You're going to talk to in number 1, right? So again, it looks like the best thing to do would be to go ahead and talk to your supervisor to talk about maybe goals, your own professional goals, and Disney World is nice, and people like, in the U.S., the habit or what people often do is they'll go to training and then they'll add a couple of vacation days onto it too. Now, what would be totally unethical would be go to Disney World for this training and then not actually attend the training sessions and just go and play, right? That would be totally unethical. All right, here's situation number 3. And this is a little bit tougher. This is actually my last slide. So, one of your colleagues has been slacking off. Is that term here in India? In other words, not doing their work. And you're getting stuck doing their work. This is unfair. What do you do? So there's the options. Talk amongst yourselves. See what you would come up with. Go to it. Talk. Oh, you don't want to talk because the person next to you might be that person who's not doing their work. Discuss amongst yourselves. See which option is best. By the way, you want an option number 5 as well? All right. Here's the time to vote again. By the way, when you vote, one thing I want you to realize is look at the percentage of people here who vote for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, right? The main thing I want you to realize is that very often ethics are a perception of different people with different backgrounds, different experiences, right? And I hope I've gone through things that are good to do if you have questions. So let's look at this. Number 1. Who votes number 1? All right, just 1. Number 2. Okay, number 3. Interesting. Whoa. Number 4. Okay. So most of you did number 3. And this may also be culture too, because in some cultures, it's you want to ensure that a person saves face amongst a lot of people. And maybe it's that your perception of what they're doing, they may be doing something else. For example, my wife is always complaining to me about one of her coworkers that is not pulling her weight, and my wife is actually getting that work. Now she does number 2. And actually, really, she does number one, and just complains to me, I'm tired of hearing about it. Right? So, maybe talking with the person is appropriate, and then somebody said there may be a sequence though. So you do number 3 and it doesn't work. What's next?
4 is the number.
So if we could agree that number 3 was tried and does not work, all right? Now who says you do number 1? Just suck it up and do it, all right? Number 2, who says you do number 2 after number 3? All right, who says you do number 4 after number 3? I didn't see everybody raise their hand, all right? So you didn't raise your hand. Oh, you're gonna, all right, let's vote again now. Who says number 2 after you try number 3? Number 2 after you try number 3. Yes, no? Okay. Number 4 after you try number 3. And number 1 after you try 3. All right? So I guess let's step back and say, what's the ethical thing to do? Remember, what's the highest order of ethics? What are you trying to do? Protect the public, right? So in the end, the public will be those who get your product. So trying to talk with the person who is not doing their ethical work, a good day's work, is important. But in the end, if they're not doing their work and it's substandard, it may harm the public. And so it is your obligation to raise a flag. And that would be probably to your supervisor. Going to HR is probably a little bit too whiny, we use in the U.S. In other words, you want to allow your own supervisor the opportunity to fix something if there's something wrong. All right? So, have you learned anything? Have you learned anything that will help you be a postgraduate scholar? Oh, you said, oh, you do the head bob. Okay, yeah. So, again, I hope this has been thought-provoking and something that you can think about when you're doing your postgraduate work. And again, we talked about citing others' work and not taking credit are very important. So I'd like to urge you, as I mentioned earlier, I would like to urge you to ensure that you collaborate as much as possible, discuss amongst yourselves, strive for excellence, do a good day's work, take credit for what you've done, and give credit for what others have done. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time. By the way, I was in a temple area, and this little guy came up to me, and apparently it's good luck to pet the cow, right? This little guy was looking for probably delicious American food in my pockets, of which I had none. All right, with that, thank you very much, and shall I take some questions? Questions? Any questions out there? We have one way up there. And this works out well that I could walk in this aisle. So, all right.
Regarding patent, we are giving the patent rights to the company, and the company does not give you any credit in return. Is that it?
Okay, so, yeah, I'll take one. Ooh, stereo. All right. So, I cannot talk to the Indian patent system. I can talk to the U.S. patent system, right? And in the U.S., when you pursue a patent, first of all, it's rather expensive to go through all the paperwork, the lawyers, etc., to pursue a patent. So usually a company will pay the $20,000 or so for all the work that gets done. On a patent, even though it is assigned to the company or the university or whatever, your name actually is listed as one of the inventors. So you'll be listed as an inventor, and the assignee will be your company. So they will give you credit for what you did. But then there's another question, and that is, who do you put on the patent as the inventor?
Everybody that participated? Or do you leave certain people off because they didn't do enough? And so that always comes down to the question is when you patent, who are the inventors? Who actually contributed to the work? So you have to make sure that you know, the same with the paper too. Who actually gets their name on the paper because they did some of the work? So so did I answer your question? All right, we'll go back over here again.
Has it been the form of promotion or?
So how the company handles its invention reward system is really up to the company. So when I worked for Ericsson, every inventor got a plaque on the first page of the patent. That's exciting, right? And $1,000. Right? Now, the intangibles is that you're now recognized as an inventor. And that is seen by your company as, oh, this person has submitted 7 patent applications, of which we actually went forward with 3 patents. So this person is very valuable, so we should give them raises and promotions so that they stay with our company and keep on inventing things. So most companies are good enough to realize they don't want to drive away innovation and inventors, so they will reward you. But it's up to the company, right? But it's ethical that they do that. All right, that answers your question. Now, I talked about who goes on the invention, also who goes on the paper. So here's another question. So one of my research students and I, we wrote a paper, and we developed an algorithm, and we developed we wrote the paper, and we needed some data to be collected, and we had some high school students that worked in our lab for free just to get experience. We actually had them collect the data. So we taught them how to stand here, make this measurement, write this down, and then once you get all the measurements down on this piece of paper, give it back to us, and then we'll enter it in and we'll assess the data. Should they be on the paper? Did they contribute to the paper or the work that was there? So think about that. Who thinks that their name should have been on the paper? Raise your hand high. Okay. Who thinks that their name should not have been on the paper? Raise your hand high. We had one person vote here. Come on, guys. You have to say one or the other, right? You have to make a decision. By the way, it's unethical to not make a decision, okay? So let's do this again. Who thinks their name should have been on the paper? All right, couple. Who thinks their names should not have been on the paper? Raise your hand high. I'm going to make sure that you didn't raise your hand. You didn't raise your hand either, did you? So which is it? One or the other? Which one? They should or should not? So, okay. We didn't put their name on the paper because 1, they didn't write a word for the paper. Number 2, they collected data that we could have done, but they just saved us the time. And 3, they didn't actually come up with any of the creative ideas associated with the paper. In other words, the algorithms and such. All they did is they were collecting data. Now, that was a decision that we made. Now, one thing I should say is that at the end of the paper, we acknowledged their contribution, which was collecting the data. All right? So it's good to acknowledge credit where credit is due, but they were not an author on the paper because they didn't actually write any of the paper. All right? And so they got, somebody said over here, a certificate or something like that, right? But you know what? They got great experience. They were able to put that on their resume, and it got them into a good college. So be it. All right, any other questions? This way? Do these work? Ooh, they work.
I work for a company. If suppose something is going on unethical, it's an illegal thing. Should I keep quiet or just quit the job, or should I blow the whistle to hire them?
Okay, so this is one of the most scary situations to be in. is to work for a company where you're earning pay and you find something that's unethical. And you have to step back. If you're truly ethical, you have to step back and say, is what's going on, some of these work sometimes, is what's going on going to harm the public good? And that's the time to say, I think this is wrong. Now, in the United States, there are laws protecting whistleblowers. So if you are a whistleblower, they are not allowed to fire you or dismiss you or punish you in any way. And I'm not sure, is that true here in India as well? Heck no, I would say. Okay. So, it's a decision you have to make. And the unfortunate thing is in the world, in many places in the world, the whistleblower is harmed for life. They will never find employment again in their field. And they will actually get attacked by the company. But in the end, the question is, if you don't think it's ethical, if you want to clear your mind, you always immediately talk to your immediate supervisor and say, I think this is unethical, or this is not right because of this and this and this, and let them respond. So when you go out and, make the big pronunciation, you want to make sure you're not wrong in the first place. So at least talking to your supervisor saying, I'm having difficulty understanding this, being appropriate for what we're doing. That's the best advice I can give you, because, in the US, the whistleblower is given some protections. Many places in the world it's not, right? Tough thing. Did I answer your question? Not the way you probably wanted to hear it, though, but yeah, that happens. All right, any other questions? Pardon me?
This could be the best answer.
It could be the best answer for your situation. And, each situation is different. A good example. There were some engineers that didn't agree with management. Engineers gave management a warning that if they did something, there would be catastrophic failure that would be really bad. And the managers said, no, don't worry about it. We won't worry about it. It's okay. And in the end, what the engineers said came to light. And that incident was the Challenger liftoff accident that NASA had, where the engineers said it's too cold for a launch because there's a technical problem with the O-rings for the solid rocket booster. Management said, don't worry about it. And in the end, the entire airship exploded on its way into orbit. And so it's an example where, in this case, the whistleblowers would have had it done really fast. And, would they have been harmed? Maybe. But you know what? In the end, they were right. And look what happened. Not only did the 7 people on the airship or spaceship die, but the space program was set back 2.5 years, and all the employment while they did all the investigations. So sometimes a whistleblower is really important, right? We have a question down here.
So while I'm at university, if I get a business idea, and so I start that business while my stay at the university, does college still have the rights or hold any right on that business?
Okay, so that was a good question. So if you're at a university and you have a business idea, does it have anything to do with what you're doing at the university?
It may or may not. Both are the questions.
Well, it makes a difference. All right. So if I am at the university and I have an idea for a great frozen yogurt shop, you know what frozen yogurt is? It's kind of like ice cream, right? Is frozen yogurt one of the key ideas or technologies of your university? The answer is no. So that wouldn't come to fruition. But let's say you work in the power engineering lab. You come up with a great idea for a product that could be manufactured and sold in power engineering. And you got the idea, while working at the university and while using university resources. As I said earlier, the university would claim ownership of that. And if they were smart, they would discover, after you would start up the business, that you violated your contract when you became a postgraduate student, and that the technology is actually owned by the university, and it's their company. Thank you very much for starting it. Okay, so what we do in the US, in that case, is the technology is actually patented by the university. You start your business, and you license the technology from the university. And if you start making profits, then you pay some money back to the university because they patented the intellectual property. So the answer is, it's always best to talk with your university's technology transfer office. And let's see, where's my, there is one here, right? Yep. So there's a technology transfer office if you have a great idea that you think might be able to be commercialized. So, did I answer your question? Okay, thank you. Good questions, good questions. Tough questions, actually. Anybody else? Here you go, ready?
What are the ethical considerations we should have when we are working with the human beings, especially if you are working, if you are doing research or the experiment with the human beings? It can be, or it may or may not have a negative impact on their life.
Okay.
So what are the?
So, good question. There are, and I can only talk with the rules and laws associated with the United States, and I don't know what they are here, or for that matter, any other company. But when I do research in the United States, if I am using human subjects, I must ensure that I go through all of these processes associated with it. And we have what's called, that wasn't me, we have, excuse me, it's what I ate for breakfast. Right? We have a, what's called a intellectual research board, and what they will look at is the processes by which I intend to protect the data of those human subjects. So, for example, there may be sensitive information about their upbringing or their current health conditions that we don't want to let anybody else know. So we have to identify a process by which we protect their identity and their specific information. And one way we do this in the United States is we assign each subject a number, and then we have this list somewhere else that's really, really protected, where number 1 is this person, number 2 is that person, number 3 is that person. And that basically we protect their identity from any of this. And when we go out and we publish, we actually have to ensure that we do not use specific names or provide information where somebody would be able to identify that one person, right? And then of course there are the ethical aspects of doing something that does them no harm, and doing something that does not harm, meaning physical and mental, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, we also have those regulations for animals, although you probably are aware that very often testing is done on, lab testing is done on animals like mice, etc. One thing you have to do is you have to kill the mice afterwards so that you can do dissections and biopsies of brains and stuff like that. So in the end, yes, there are certain ethical rules that should be followed, and usually your university should tell you what those exact rules are. Okay, good questions. Any other questions? All right, it looks like that is it. I would like to thank you for your time and your interaction, especially my friend up here who will remember this talk forever, I'm sure. And again, remember, give credit where credit is due, and make sure that you do good for all of society and all of that you engineer. Thank you very much.
Thank
thank you, Dr. Jim Conrad, for the sensitive lecture on ethics in research and profession. NIT Trichy Research Scholars Forum would also like to establish the contact with the North Carolina State University so that we would have more technical sessions with the fellow colleagues in the various disciplines through Skype or online. We'd also like to extend activities such as like collaborative research with the university. So it's time for us to show our gratitude. So I would invite Dr. Murthy, Faculty Advisor, Tripoli Association, and the first year coordinator, along with Dr. Venkata Kritika ma'am, the Faculty Advisor of RSF NIT Forum, to facilitate Dr. Jim Conrad with the Institute Memento.
And I need one thing. I need a selfie of you and everybody else. So are we ready? It's always fun to do this. All right, here we go. All right, here we go.
Stand up.
Everybody happy?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
I should really thank Professor James Conrad because not only for this lecture, he has been in long association with our institute. He visited NIT Trichy in January 2015, along with one of his conference visit at that time. And we interacted at that time, but we didn't continue much beyond it. And last year, I was handling a subject on, a course on embedded system design for a final year BTech, and he has given around 10 lectures through video conferencing mode, and one of his lectures is on ethics in research and profession, which we got very much impressed, and he told me that he is coming over to India for a conference this year also. So our director has permitted us to invite Professor James here, and we made this lecture as the first one. I think for the new entrants, this is the first lecture you had. I feel it would be great for you to listen about ethics in research and profession at the start itself. So I should really thank him for the continual support, and probably if anyone who works in the same area can interact with him, and further you can develop the collaboration. I thank the professor, and I would like you to give the feedback maybe in 5 minutes so that we can wind up the session. Thank you. No. Maybe our Tripoli guidance.
So I request the participants to fill up the feedback forms which is being circulated so that we improvise ourselves in the further meetings.
If someone is working in this area, we have the lecture on embedded system design in the afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Okay, organized by Tripoli Association. If anyone is interested, you are invited to attend it.